The silence of deep space was absolute. Outpost Vela 7 drifted in orbit above the barren rock of Kessar Prime, a lone sentinel standing watch over the outermost edges of the Threx Dominion. It was an unremarkable station, its purpose simple: monitoring, routine patrol coordination, and the occasional customs enforcement for unauthorized traders skirting the borders of Threx-controlled space. For decades, the outpost had existed in quiet obscurity, its crew lulled into complacency by the sheer uneventfulness of their postings. Tonight, that would change. Lieutenant Cale Voth, a seasoned officer of the Dominion's fleet, leaned over the console, eyes narrowing at an anomaly blinking across his display. The station's long-range scanners had picked up something moving beyond the outer system. A vessel, perhaps, though no known transponder signals accompanied its approach. Its energy signature was irregular, shifting unpredictably as if something about the ship itself resisted traditional scans. He exhaled sharply, brushing a hand over the panel to refine the readings. The object was moving fast, not standard patrol fast, too fast. He felt a prickle of unease run down his spine. Even Threx warships, renowned for their engineering superiority, adhered to certain expected propulsion patterns. This thing was different. It moved with purpose, cutting a direct path toward the sector's core. A quiet beeping pulsed from the station's central console, and within moments, 2 more officers had gathered around, their expressions drawn with concern. "Another sensor malfunction?" one muttered, his voice strained with forced indifference. "This sector's always picking up false readings from spatial distortions." Cale shook his head. No distortion could mask a signal this clearly. It's deliberate, controlled. Something is coming. The hum of the station's artificial atmosphere seemed louder now, the mechanical breath of the life support system filling the growing silence. A second, sharper alarm burst to life as the console flickered again. The object had just altered its course. It was no longer skimming the system's periphery. It was heading straight for them. Kyle's stomach tightened. He turned toward the communications officer, a young recruit whose fingers hovered nervously over her panel. "Send a priority alert to the Dominion. Full emergency classification. Now." The officer hesitated only a fraction of a second before executing the command. The station's automated distress beacon flared to life, broadcasting a sector-wide warning across Dominion space. A heavy silence hung between them as they watched the readout. There was no response, not yet, but there would be. The Dominion's fleet command would demand an explanation. They would want to know why an unregistered vessel was closing in on their borders with no sign of slowing. The console's display suddenly distorted, flickering with static. The sensor feed warped, briefly twisting into unreadable data streams before stabilizing once more. The object had changed speed again. It was accelerating. A cold pressure settled in Cale's chest. That was impossible. No known vessel could adjust velocity this rapidly, not without tearing itself apart. In the span of mere moments, the readings had shifted from long-range tracking to mid-range proximity. The ship was now moving faster than anything Cale had ever seen. If the calculations were correct, they had mere minutes before it reached them. Panic crackled through the control room like an exposed wire. Officers whispered among themselves, some frantically rerouting power to defensive systems, others standing frozen, transfixed by the surreal horror unfolding before them. Kyle barely heard them. His gaze was fixed on the viewport, the vast nothingness beyond the glass. And then, a shadow materialized against the void. The ship was there. It had arrived. No warp signatures, no energy surge, no transition phase. One moment, it had been a blip in the distance. The next, it had bridged the impossible gap and loomed before them like a nightmare made manifest. It was enormous, a monolithic construct of matte black plating with no visible insignia, no flashing beacons, no glowing engine ports to mark its presence. It did not shimmer with the artificial radiance of Dominion warships, nor did it bear the crude aggression of pirate vessels. It was cold, lifeless, a silent behemoth that defied classification. The station's alarms screamed. Defensive turrets rotated, targeting systems scrambling to lock onto the entity before them. But something was wrong. The targeting reticles flickered and failed, struggling to maintain a lock. It was as if the ship's very existence resisted detection. Then, without warning, the station's communications array crackled to life. A transmission pushed through the interference, cutting through the static with the precision of a blade. It was not Dominion language. It was not the garbled dialects of fringe species. It was something else entirely. A voice. Cold, mechanical, final. This sector is in violation of the Accord. Sentence. Extermination. A moment of absolute stillness. Then the hull began to rupture. The grand halls of the Dominions. High Council shimmered with cold opulence, a testament to the Empire's unchecked dominion over the stars. Towering crystalline pillars lined the chamber, refracting soft blue light across the gathered elites. Figures adorned in flowing ceremonial armor, their eyes filled with the arrogance of absolute rule. Here, beneath the sculpted dome of a world that had never known war within its own atmosphere, the fate of the sector was being debated. At the center of the chamber, a three-dimensional projection of Outpost Vela 7 flickered in unsettling silence. A slow rotation of the station's structure played out in haunting detail, its once intact form now marred by fractures and drifting wreckage. The outer hull was breached, great sections of the station torn apart as though by an invisible force. No debris from enemy weapons, no signs of conventional battle, just absence, entire portions of the outpost that no longer existed, as if reality itself had chosen to erase them. Commander Velrek stood at the base of the projection, his posture rigid, his mind a battlefield of calculations. He was not one of the ruling elite. He had fought for every scrap of recognition in the Dominion's military hierarchy, clawing his way from the lower ranks through sheer tactical brilliance. Yet now, standing before the council, he felt the weight of futility pressing down on him. The councilors were murmuring among themselves, expressions ranging from mild concern to detached amusement. Some exchanged idle remarks about pirates or rogue insurgents, trivial explanations for an event they had yet to comprehend. Velrek's jaw tightened. They didn't understand. They didn't want to understand. A voice, rich with the practiced indifference of authority, cut through the discussion. High Chancellor Surik, an elder statesman with deep violet skin and piercing golden eyes, leaned forward. Commander Velrek, the reports claim an unknown warship breached our borders. I assume you have analyzed the data and found a rational explanation. Velrek's fingers curled at his sides. A rational explanation? There was nothing rational about what had happened at Vela 7. The evidence suggests otherwise, Chancellor, Velrek said, his voice steady but edged with urgency. We're not dealing with pirates or common raiders. This vessel moved through our defenses like they weren't even there. No warp signature. No conventional propulsion readings. It bypassed our warning systems as if it knew precisely how they operated. And then it erased the station. One of the counselors scoffed. You mean destroyed it? Warships destroy things, Commander. It's what they do. Velrek's glare was sharp as a blade. No, Counselor. Destroyed implies a battle, a struggle. There was none. The outpost's hull was not damaged. It was removed. Entire sections ceased to exist in the space of seconds. We don't even know what weapon was used because nothing in our records matches what happened. The station was intact, then it wasn't, as if reality itself had been rewritten. A hush fell over the chamber. The idea was absurd, impossible, and yet the projection before them did not lie. Chancellor Surik exhaled through his nostrils, unimpressed. Then you suggest what, exactly? That we are under attack by an enemy capable of rewriting reality? Some ghost ship from the void? You were trained in military strategy, Velrek, not superstition. Velrek's fingers hovered over the control panel, his mind a storm of frustration. He had studied the classified archives, reports buried under layers of Dominion intelligence, whispers of encounters that had been dismissed or covered up. Humanity. That word alone sent a ripple of unease through his thoughts. The Dominion had encountered them before, but never in direct war. There had been incidents, skirmishes with colonies, clashes on the fringes of mapped space. The Threx had always assumed that humans were lesser. They lacked an empire, lacked unity. They were scattered, warring amongst themselves, a species doomed to be a footnote in galactic history. And yet, there were the rumors. Ships that had vanished after engaging human forces, vessels that had returned crippled, their surviving crews, unwilling to speak of what they had seen. Commanders who had faced human warships and refused to ever take the field again. But these stories had always been dismissed, buried beneath the weight of the Dominion's arrogance. Velrek forced himself to speak carefully. I am suggesting that we not dismiss this as an isolated anomaly. We have encountered nothing like this before, and until we understand what we are dealing with, we must assume this is only the beginning. Low murmur spread through the chamber, some counselors shifting uncomfortably while others remained unmoved. Another voice, sharp and condescending, rang out from the upper seats. Enough of this paranoia, Counselor Zyros sneered. One ship, has entered our space, and you want us to treat it as an existential threat? Shall we cower before the unknown like frightened animals? Or do we crush it, as we have crushed every enemy before? A chorus of approval echoed from those who still clung to their confidence. The Dominion had ruled unchallenged for generations. They had crushed empires, absorbed civilizations, and bent entire species to their will. What was one warship to an empire that had never known true defeat? Chancellor Surik gave a slow, measured nod. A single warship, no matter its capabilities, is not a match for the Dominion. We will dispatch a fleet. Let us see how this phantom vessel fares against the full force of our military. Velrek stiffened. This was a mistake, a fatal one. But he was just a commander. A soldier. His protests would be ignored, and so he merely bowed his head in rigid formality. As you command, Chancellor. The decision was made. A fleet would be sent, and for the first time in the Dominion's long history, it would not return. The Dominion's fleet surged through the void, a wall of fire and steel cutting toward the intruder with unwavering purpose. 50 warships, an armada forged in the heart of 1,000 conquered worlds, moved in seamless formation, each vessel a testament to the Dominion's mastery of warfare. Dreadnoughts, carriers, and escort destroyers formed a predatory phalanx, their weapon systems primed, their shields humming with barely contained power. This was not an expedition. It was an execution. Admiral Keln Veros stood upon the command bridge of the Dominion flagship Judicator, his presence a towering shadow against the cold blue glow of the tactical displays. His expression was unreadable, carved from years of military discipline and battlefield victories. He had led countless campaigns, crushed insurrections, razed defiant colonies to ash. He had never lost. This would be no different. The target loomed in the darkness ahead. The unidentified warship, still and silent against the endless black, bore no markings, no emissions, no signs of life. Its hull, a vast, lightless monolith, seemed to absorb the surrounding starlight, an aberration against the natural order of space. It did not react to their approach. It did not acknowledge their presence. It simply was. A flicker of unease passed through Veros's mind, buried instantly beneath the weight of cold logic. Fear was the weakness of lesser beings. All ships, weapons live. If it does not respond, we reduce it to debris. A chorus of acknowledgments filled the bridge. Across the fleet, batteries powered up, kinetic railguns loaded their hyperdense slugs and plasma lances primed for discharge. Thousands of targeting systems locked onto the alien vessel. It was laughable, in a way. The enemy ship had not even activated shields, had not attempted to evade or position itself for defense. Did it not understand? Did it not fear? Veros allowed himself a breath of satisfaction. This would be a swift, brutal end. Fire. The fleet obeyed. Space ignited in a storm of fury. A tidal wave of destruction surged forward, a symphony of annihilation, composed of the most advanced weapons the Dominion had ever built. Railgun slugs, accelerated to near-light speeds, screamed through the void. Plasma lances tore the fabric of space itself, molten streams of artificial suns converging toward a single unmovable target. Missiles, armed with warheads capable of reducing planetary surfaces to barren wastelands, streaked forward like vengeful specters. And then, nothing. The projectiles struck the black hull and simply vanished. No explosion, no impact, no defensive reaction. It was as though the laws of physics themselves had been rewritten in real time. The kinetic rounds did not ricochet or shatter. They ceased to exist the moment they touched the ship's surface. The plasma lances, capable of burning, through battleship armor in an instant, faded into nothingness, their energy consumed without a trace. The missiles blinked from reality, as if they had never been launched. For the first time in his long, decorated career, Admiral Varos felt the cold touch of something he did not understand. The bridge fell into stunned silence. Officers stared at their readouts, hands frozen over control panels. The fleet's combined firepower, the might of an empire that had conquered entire species, had amounted to nothing. Impossible, someone whispered. Varos's throat was dry. His mind screamed for an answer, an explanation grounded in the science he had known his entire life. There had to be an energy field, a dampening mechanism, something. But the readings showed nothing. The warship's surface had absorbed every attack like a black hole devouring light. No shields, no countermeasures. It simply wasn't affected. And then, for the first time, the warship moved. A silent shift, a motion too smooth, too precise, as though the laws of inertia held no dominion over it. There was no flare of engines, no thrust vectors, just an unholy fluid drift that placed it directly in the heart of the Dominion's formation. A predator among prey. A new signal pierced the fleet's comms, overriding encrypted channels, flooding every ship with a single transmission. The same voice that had spoken before, emotionless, calculated, final. The sentences confirmed. Commencing eradication. Varos had no time to react before reality itself fractured. Space warped. Not in the way of conventional energy distortions. Not like gravity wells or fold space ruptures. It was something deeper. Something primal. The very concept of existence seemed to ripple around the warship. And then, ships vanished. Not destroyed. Not obliterated in fire and debris. Vanished. Entire vessels, along with their crews, winked out of existence as if plucked from time itself. One moment, the Dominion fleet had been a solid wall of military might. The next, vast gaps appeared, where warships had once been. Their absence a wound in the structure of reality. Panic erupted. Officers screamed across comm channels. Crew members abandoned their stations, their minds unable to comprehend what their eyes had witnessed. The fleet was disintegrating, not in battle, but in something worse, in an event beyond their understanding. Varos's hands trembled. His command ship still existed, still remained intact, but the battle was over before it had even begun. This wasn't war. It was judgment. His voice barely found strength as he issued his final order. Retreat! The surviving vessels, only a fraction of the once mighty fleet, scrambled for emergency warp calculations. Engines flared. Coordinates were locked. But as the first ship initiated its jump, it did not escape. It did not enter the safety of fold space. It froze mid-jump, its hull twisting, stretching, then it shattered, not into debris, but into nothingness. Varos's breath came ragged. He turned to his crew, saw the horror on their faces. They had to leave. Now. Even if the warship followed, even if it hunted them to the ends of the universe, they had to warn the Dominion of what they had encountered. The Judicator's warp drive engaged. The stars outside twisted, reality stretching as the ship broke free of normal space. Varos dared to hope, dared to believe that they had escaped. Then, the last transmission from the warship reached his mind. A whisper. A promise. You cannot escape judgment. The Judicator tore through fold space, its hull groaning under the violent strain of an emergency warp. The surviving crew clung to their stations, eyes darting between screens filled with error messages, sensor distortions, and warnings of structural instability. The ship had barely escaped, but the silence in the command bridge was thick with something worse than fear. Dread. Admiral Varos stood at the center of the chaos, his hands gripping the console before him, as though it were the only thing keeping him anchored to reality. His mind replayed the battle over and over, trying to make sense of the impossible. The Dominion had faced superior technology before, had encountered enemy fleets with advancements they had never seen. But never had they faced something that refused to obey the fundamental laws of existence. Their weapons had done nothing. Their ships had been erased like they had never existed. And now, even with the vast gulf of space between them and the anomaly, He could not shake the feeling that they had not escaped. The comms officer, a young Threxian with trembling hands, broke the silence. "Sir, we need to report to High Command. They need to know what happened." Varos turned slowly, his expression carved from stone. "And what would we tell them?" His voice was low, but it carried the weight of a man who had seen death itself. "That we encountered something that should not be? That we lost a fleet to a ship that did not fire a single shot? That we have no explanation?" The crew exchanged uneasy glances. The Dominion did not lose. The Dominion did not retreat. What had happened in that battle was more than defeat. It was a warning. Varos exhaled slowly, forcing his thoughts into order. "Prepare a secure transmission to High Command. We will send everything. Our logs, sensor readings, every fragment of data we managed to recover." The officers moved quickly, relieved to have orders to follow. But as the communications array powered up, the lights flickered, and the ship lurched. A tremor passed through the deck, not from external impact, but something deeper. Like reality itself had convulsed. "Report!" Varos barked. "Unknown interference," the sensor chief responded, hands flying across the controls. "Our position is stable, but He stopped, eyes widening at the display before him. "Sir, this can't be right." Varos stepped forward, his own gaze locking onto the readings. His stomach twisted. It was impossible. They had traveled nearly 100 light-years from the battle site, a jump that should have taken them beyond even the most advanced tracking technology. And yet, the anomalous warship was still there, not in pursuit, not hunting. It was simply present, its black hull looming on the very edge of their sensor range, as if distance meant nothing to it. A cold realization settled in Varos's mind. It had never been a question of whether they could escape. The warship had always known where they were. It had always been watching, his fingers curled into fists. "Cut the transmission, now!" The comms officer hesitated. "Sir, do it!" Varos's voice was sharp, edged with an urgency that silenced the entire bridge. "Whatever that thing is, it let us go for a reason. If we send this message, we may be leading it straight to the Dominion's core systems." The officers paled at the implication. The Dominion's homeworlds had never been breached, their fortifications unmatched. But how could they defend against something that ignored the very rules of war? The transmission was terminated. The bridge remained still. The crew waited for their admiral to make sense of the madness, to find a course of action that didn't end with their utter annihilation. Varos turned toward the intelligence officer, a quiet, calculating Threx named Relis. "Pull the restricted archives, every classified encounter with human vessels, every mission that ended with unexplained anomalies. I want to know if this has happened before." Relis hesitated. "Sir, those records are highly classified, even to military command." Varos's gaze was unyielding. "I don't care. If there is anything that resembles what we just faced, I need to know." Minutes passed in tense silence as Relis worked. Files buried under layers of Dominion secrecy began to surface. Fragments of lost battles, unexplained disappearances, encounters that had been erased from official history. And then, among the pages of forgotten truths, the intelligence officer found something, a file, over 200 years old. The Dominion had encountered humans before, not in war, not in diplomacy, but in something far more terrifying. A lone Dominion vessel had crossed into an uncharted sector of space, responding to what they had believed to be a distress signal. Only one crew member had returned. The survivor's report had been deemed unstable, his words dismissed as delusion. He spoke of a human warship that did not move, did not speak, until judgment was passed. A ship that was not bound by time or physics. A vessel that was not merely advanced, but something other. The Dominion, in its arrogance, had assumed the report was the ravings of a broken mind. Varos's breath came slow and steady. It all made sense now. The fragmented reports, the missing fleets, the whispered warnings that had been ignored. This was not the first time the Dominion had crossed paths with this warship. It was simply the first time it had decided to act. The bridge was suffocating with silence. The officers looked to their admiral, waiting for an order, a command, anything that would make this nightmare something they could fight. But Varos knew the truth now. This was not a battle they could win. The Dominion had spent centuries believing itself invincible, an empire beyond challenge. They had seen humanity as a scattered, divided species, a civilization that could never rival their own. But this warship, this thing, was no mere vessel. It was something more. Something beyond them. And it had judged them. Varos turned to his crew, his voice quiet, but filled with a grim finality. Prepare a new course. We do not return to the core systems. We do not lead it home. A lieutenant hesitated. Then, where do we go? Varos's eyes were dark with understanding. We run. The judicator fled through the void, a lone specter drifting between the dying light of distant stars. The Dominion's borders lay far behind, and ahead, only the uncharted abyss stretched beyond their reach. Every system they passed was abandoned, every relay station silent. The Admiral had given the order, and now they ran, not out of fear, but out of the grim understanding that the alternative was annihilation. For days, the crew moved like ghosts through the corridors, their voices hushed, their actions mechanical. The weight of what they had seen pressed upon them like an unseen force. Every scan of their surroundings returned the same chilling answer. It was still there. It did not chase, did not threaten. The warship remained on the very edges of their sensor range, distant but unwavering. A shadow that followed without effort, without error, as though its presence was woven into the very fabric of reality itself. Admiral Varos barely slept. He pored over the records, searching for something, anything, that might explain what they had faced. The more he read, the deeper the horror settled in his bones. The reports buried within the Dominion's restricted archives spoke of things that had no place in science, no place in war. Fleets that had disappeared, stations that had sent distress calls only to fall silent before rescue could arrive. A pattern so meticulously erased from history that only now, in the face of its undeniable presence, could he see the shape of the truth. The Dominion had always believed itself to be the apex force in the galaxy. It had conquered world after world, species after species, bending the laws of existence to its will through power and technology. But something else had been watching. Something beyond the petty wars of empires, beyond the arrogance of dominion and control. And now, it had passed its judgment. The silence shattered when the alarm screamed to life. Every console flickered in sudden chaos, data streams corrupting in real time, the ship's systems falling into disarray. The crew scrambled as the judicator lurched violently, forces unseen wrenching it from its course. The stars twisted, and a cold, unnatural presence flooded through the ship's core. "It's not possible," the sensor chief gasped, his voice raw with disbelief. "It's here." The warship had closed the distance. Not through engines, not through any method the Dominion understood. One moment, it had been distant, impossibly far, separated by the vast emptiness of space. The next, it was a void in the black fabric of reality itself, towering and still, its impossible hull reflecting nothing. It had not traveled, it had arrived. The bridge pulsed with panic. Officers shouting orders, weapons priming, calculations for emergency jumps flashing across the displays. But Varos knew, with a certainty that was more suffocating than any battlefield, that none of it mattered. The ship they faced did not obey the laws of war. It did not need weapons, did not need threats. It was the manifestation of something absolute, something unstoppable. And then, for the first time, it spoke. Not through comms, not through any known transmission frequency. The words manifested in the minds of the crew, not heard, but understood, as though they had always been there, waiting beneath the surface of consciousness. The Dominion's time is over. The air itself seemed to tremble. A soundless pressure weighed upon them, deeper than fear, deeper than comprehension. It was not an ultimatum. It was a statement. Varos forced himself to stand. He had commanded entire fleets, shattered planets, reshaped the course of history through war and blood. But here, against this force that was not bound by reality, he was powerless. Still, he would not kneel. His voice was steady. Why? There was silence. And then, the answer came, not in words, but in understanding. A rush of knowledge, of truths that did not belong to mortals, crashed into his mind. He saw it, not as an enemy, not as an invader, but as something vast, something eternal. The warship was not a vessel. It was a sentence, a force that had existed long before the Dominion had risen to power, long before any empire had carved its name into the stars. It was the end. The Dominion was not being attacked. It was being erased. One by one, the outposts along the Dominion's borders fell. Silent, fleets vanished without resistance. Worlds that had once been bastions of power became barren husks, their histories wiped away as though they had never existed. There were no survivors, no wreckage, no war. Only silence. The Judicator trembled, its structure fracturing at the edges, reality itself unraveling around it. The crew screamed, voices lost to the void as their very existence teetered on the brink of nothingness. And Varos, in his final moments, understood. The Dominion had believed itself to be eternal. But it had never mattered, and now, nothing would remain. The Dominion had ruled the stars for over 1,000 cycles, its might stretching across hundreds of systems, its influence woven into the fabric of the known galaxy. It had crushed rebellions, shattered fleets, and rewritten the histories of entire civilizations to reflect its dominion over them. It had built monuments to its power, erased those who had opposed it, and ensured that its name would be spoken, with reverence and fear for eternity. But eternity was an illusion, and now the Empire was dying, not in fire and battle, not in the chaos of war, but in the cold, methodical unraveling of its very existence. Across the core worlds, silence spread like an infection. The great citadel of the Dominion High Council, once a fortress of indomitable rule, flickered in and out of phase, as if reality itself struggled to remember it. The Grand Minister stood before the central data array, watching in horror as entire star systems vanished from the records. Not lost, not destroyed, but erased. The names of conquered worlds were stripped from history, the memories of their existence fading even in the minds of those who had ruled them. Every message sent to the outer fleets was met with static. Every distress call left unanswered. There were no refugees, no survivors. They had simply ceased to be. On the industrial stronghold of Chorus Prime, factories that had once burned bright, with the production of war machines, stood empty, their automated systems running as if their purpose had been forgotten. Workers wandered the streets in a daze, unable to recall what they had built, who they had fought for, or why they had ever been there. The vast orbital stations that had hung above the planet were gone, leaving behind only the strange, aching certainty that something was missing. In the Dominion's military strongholds, admirals gathered in desperation, issuing orders to fleets that no longer responded. The Dominion's greatest warships, vessels that had once reduced entire planets to ash, drifted aimlessly, their crews lost in confusion, their weapons inert. It was as if the Empire had been severed from time itself, its vast and terrible legacy unwinding like a thread pulled loose from the fabric of the cosmos. The warship did not need to conquer. It did not need to destroy. It erased. And then, the First World fell. Not in flame, not in devastation, but in the quiet unraveling of reality itself. The capital planet of the Dominion, a world that had stood as the heart of an empire for over a millennium, simply was not. The vast spires of its megacities, the countless millions who had walked its streets, the history carved into its monuments, gone. The space where it had once existed became an empty void, not a ruin, not a battlefield, but nothing. No dust, no echoes, no memory. Nothing remained. The High Council did not have time to comprehend the loss before the Second World fell. Then, the third, then the fourth. Entire systems blinked out of existence, not consumed, not taken, but erased, as though the Dominion had never reached them, as though its influence had never mattered. The Empire's vast history, its wars, its conquests, its victories and its atrocities, were dissolving, unraveling into meaninglessness. Across the remaining Dominion territories, confusion turned to terror. Inhabitants of distant colonies looked to the stars and found them unfamiliar. Records of their ancestors, of their rulers, of their very origins, became fragmented, filled with gaps where knowledge had once been absolute. Scholars tried to recall the names of the emperors who had once ruled them, only to realize those names no longer existed. Veterans of wars fought for the Dominion stared at their medals, their commendations, unable to remember what battles they had won or whom they had fought against. The empire had been built upon control of its people, of its history, of its place in the galaxy, and now that foundation was crumbling. The warship did not speak again. It did not announce its intentions. It did not demand surrender. It simply was, and in its wake, the Dominion was not. The final moments of the Empire were not marked by desperate last stands or grand speeches. There were no heroic efforts, no acts of defiance. The Dominion had prided itself on its strength, its ability to crush any opposition, to withstand any war. But there was no war. There was only the end. In the last, surviving sector deep within the void, the Judicator remained. Its hull flickered with instability, the edges of its form unraveling as the force that had judged the Dominion reached the remnants of those who had tried to flee. Admiral Varro stood in the command bridge, watching as the final fleet of his once great empire faded from reality, their shapes dissolving into nothing. His crew did not scream, did not struggle. They simply ceased. Varros felt the presence of the warship, vast and unknowable, pressing against his consciousness one last time. No anger, no malice, only the weight of something absolute. The Dominion had believed itself to be unchallengeable. But it had never been a conqueror. It had never been the ultimate power it had thought itself to be. It had been tolerated. Until now. The bridge grew cold. The stars outside dimmed. Varros closed his eyes, and the Dominion was no more. The Dominion was gone. Not defeated, not shattered, not even remembered. It had been wiped away as if it had never been, its existence reduced to the void between the stars, a hollow absence where an empire had once ruled. Across the galaxy, the systems that had once lived under its banner found themselves adrift, unmoored from a past that no longer existed. Some had been loyal subjects, others bitter enemies. But now, they shared a single fate. They had been left behind. For those who remained, the unraveling of the Dominion was felt in ways beyond mere politics or power. The absence left behind was deeper than the loss of a ruling force. It was a fracture in history itself, a hole in the foundation of understanding. Archive worlds that had once contained the records of millennia now held only fragments, their databases filled with inconsistencies, corrupted entries, and empty files where entire civilizations had once been chronicled. Star charts contained gaps, vast regions where no records existed, yet the space itself remained unchanged. Planets still turned in their orbits, the stars still burned, but their pasts had become ghosts, whispers of things that had never been. Those who had once been subjects of the Dominion awoke to a galaxy that felt wrong. Histories had shifted, memories had blurred. Merchants, travelers, and diplomats who had interacted with the Dominion could recall their own experiences, but when they tried to place those memories within a greater timeline, they found only uncertainty. It was as though the Dominion had always been a myth, a story half-remembered, a name without substance. Some refused to believe it had ever existed at all. Others whispered of a force beyond comprehension, a judgment passed on an empire that had stretched too far, taken too much. Among the few who truly understood what had happened, the silence left behind was more terrifying than any war. There was no wreckage, no ruins, no survivors to tell the tale. There was only the emptiness of what had once been, and the knowledge that the force responsible had not acted in hatred, nor in conquest, nor in vengeance. It had acted in inevitability, and that made it far more terrifying than any enemy the galaxy had ever known. Beyond the edges of known space, in the dark expanse where no empire ruled, wanderers and explorers spoke of strange anomalies, systems where the laws of physics felt stretched thin, where the passage of time seemed inconsistent, where travelers would emerge from hyperspace only to find themselves gripped by an overwhelming sense of unease. The deep space beacons designed to chart the vastness of the void sometimes flickered with distorted transmissions, Bursts of static, broken messages, fragments of voices that should not have been there. Some believed they were echoes, remnants of the Dominion trying to claw its way back into existence. But the truth was far worse. The warship was still there, not seen, not detected, but present. A shadow on the edge of perception, a weight on the fabric of reality itself. It did not hunt. It did not speak. It did not need to. It had done what it had come to do. And yet, its presence remained. A silent reminder that there were forces in the universe beyond understanding, beyond resistance, beyond survival. The warship had erased the Dominion, and someday it would return. The galaxy moved on, as it always did. New wars would be fought, new empires would rise, new legends would be written in the stars. But in the darkest corners of space, in the whispered fears of those who dared to look too far beyond the boundaries of the known, the question remained. Who had built the warship? What purpose had it served?